Hi there. Today's reading is a story called Peepers that was published in Typehouse magazine. The windows appeared the morning after she told him she was pregnant. Hers was larger, a bay window swallowing her navel as it curled around the furl of her stomach and the knotted flesh of her outie. His started smaller, a flash of glass like a plug in his own innie belly button, hard as diamond when he tapped on it with his index finger. When they had celebratory sex that morning, disregarding their gummy lips and sour morning breath to kiss and inhale one another and drag their fingers through each other's hair, he kept looking down, seeing the glinty flash of the glass in his skin reflecting off hers. As her stomach grew, so did both windows, creeping up along their stomachs, and by the end of her first trimester, pushing against their ribs. When he worked out, he had to abandon crunches for planks, and squatting became difficult. He switched from dumbbells and barbells to the machines and cable tower out of fear of cracking the glass and spilling his innards all over the benches and free weights. In the morning, while he shaved, she cleared the glass for both of them, and, razor in hand, he would lean down and look at what was coming to life inside her. The world in her body was the fascinating landscape. Where he was the sleepy snake exhibit at the zoo, she was the prowling, ferocious big cats, waiting to be fed. His window revealed a strip of intestine, a bulging liver and stomach, but hers, the royal of her uterus as it expanded like a balloon being inflated one breath at a time, the frame of her window dipping toward her vulva to reveal the pathways their baby would take when the time came. Just as the doctor promised, they both became transparent inside, the external layers of organ turning to a glinting crystal color like sprite, so that the inner pathways of their bodies revealed themselves, blood vessels and stomach acid and blooms of bile visible. He stared at himself as he dressed for work, watching last night's enchiladas horking and dissolving in the clear globe of his stomach that looked like a squashed crystal ball. When they were given the news, twins, they watched as the lining of her uterus seemed to vanish and the children pressed up against the glass of her window, little fleshy bodies the size of heirloom tomatoes. She carried a boy and a girl, which would satisfy both of them. His want for an eldest son, her wish for a daughter into whose ear she would whisper instructions for beating up bullies while brushing her child's hair. While she bloomed out, her window poking from the tank tops she stuffed herself into, his stayed the same single slate, hard and unyielding and showing nothing but the purplish-brown muck of his insides, like a car windshield spattered with heaps of mud. He felt lifeless and dull, even when she pressed herself against him, curling her buttocks toward his crotch and moaning with pleasure when he slid inside, alleviating the stretching heat in her groin. She said she loved the feel of his window on her back, cool like a slab of ice, relieving the kinetic energy of 3 life forces coursing through her. "I'm so plain," he said. "My insides are so boring." "You're not boring," she said. "You're traditional and strong." "But there's nothing worth seeing." He rapped on the glass and felt a gurgle in his stomach. She found him an artist who specialized in this kind of thing. Her studio smelled of turpentine and Parmesan cheese and mint. He stripped off his shirt when she asked to examine the window, unabashed as he pulled the fabric over his head, chest swelling with pride for his lean length, the strips of muscle in his shoulders, his clean complexion and hairless back. The artist squatted before him, blinking at the window. "It's an exciting time," she said, breath foggy on the glass. She wiped it away with the butt of her hand. "Anxious, too." "Do you have children?" "One." She stretched. "But he's adopted, so it's not quite the same." "I bet it's similar." She smiled at him. "I'm going to start with some test designs. I'll use watercolor so they'll come off in the shower." "Like temporary tattoos." He nodded at her arms. Her skin was covered in them, drawing so lifelike they seemed to move around when she did, the tiger on her triceps snarling when she extended her arm, the ballerina's tutu fluttering when her left forearm twitched. If she swallowed, the dove on her throat seemed to flap its wings. On her back, she wore a white spaghetti-strap tank top. The surface of a lake shimmered, and the branches of a willow tree shuddered as she rolled her shoulders. "Something like that." She smiled again, spreading her lips wide to reveal a clam-pink tongue studded with a blue stone and perfectly white teeth that matched the milky color of the walls and blank canvases strewn near the wide windows peering onto a busy downtown street. He felt the paint like slithering snails as she layered it on in broad strokes, curls and whirls of tickling contact that reminded him of his wife kissing along his skin as she moved southward, and he had to count prime numbers to suppress the erection he felt growing. The artist seemed not to notice, her concentration entirely on the brush she gripped in her right hand. A trail of butterflies along her radius and ulna flapped as she twitched and twirled her fingers. Her tongue poked out through her lips, pushed to one side and held by a large incisor. She washed out her brushes more than once, and during the breaks he leaned down over himself to see her progress, but from his standing position the picture just looked like swirls and globs of random color. When she announced she was finished, she tapped him on the oblique, her hands warm like fresh bread, and his skin goose-pimpled where her fingers brushed against him. Then she unveiled a full-length mirror, obscured under a paint-smeared tarp, and led him to look at what she'd done. Across his belly, obscuring the royal of his guts, was a landscape of small woodland creatures. 2 rabbits, a cluster of squirrels, a trio of blue jays flapping just beneath his ribs. Over his liver prowled a wolf. He nodded and smiled, but felt he couldn't hide his disappointment. The creatures were into a realistic blend of fur and fangs and hooves and claws, but they were lifeless, nothing like the animals living on her skin. "They'll wash off with soap and a good scrub," she said, resting a hand on his shoulder and smiling. "We can try something else next time before we move to oils or acrylic, something longer lasting." "Okay." His wife was lying on the couch in a maternity bra and stretchy pants the color of Pinot Noir. Inside her, the twins were coiled around one another like a pair of kidneys. "They've been kicking all day," she said, tapping on the glass with her right knuckle. "So hard I thought they might shatter and spill them all over the carpet. Will you rub my feet? They're killing me." Her skin was soft in his hands, and he liked the little moans that escaped from her lips, small vibrating noises that he pictured bubbling from her throat. She was sweaty, even though the air conditioning was blasting, her face plastered to her forehead. "Let's have sex," she said. "Right now. Right here. I don't want to move." When he pulled off his shirt, they hated being anything but fully nude when they made love, she giggled at the forest animals. "So she doesn't know anything about you," she said. "She'll do better next time. Now take your pants off, please." Sex had become clanky-clunky, an affair of disconnected thrusting, their bodies joined only at the crotch because of the blossom of her bay window that stretched and rounded around her stomach. Lying on her side had started to come with pinched pain in her hips and ribs, and if either of them climbed atop the other, the grating sound of glass clicking and scraping against glass left them both disoriented and edgy, unable to find pleasure in something normally monumental and enjoyable. So they accepted the cruder position of her lying spread before him on a couch cushion or the bed, he standing or kneeling before her, plugging away. They both felt like amateur porn stars, their positions institutional and stiff, and they both missed the warmth of their close-together bodies, the smell of sweat percolating in their pores, the slow rhythm of their tingled, tightening breath. "The squirrel near your belly button is eyeing me funny," she said. He stopped, rubbed her ankle. "Sorry," she said. "Keep going. I'll just look away." In the shower that night, he took the loofah to the animals, scraping away the paint as water from their high-efficiency showerhead beat against his back. "Can we do something about so many eyes this time?" he asked the artist the next week. "Sure," she said. "Strip, please." The watercolors again, the cool brushstrokes. She hummed and whistled and more than once paused, stepped back and frowned, staring at her work. Then she nodded, diving back in like a missile homing toward his belly button or small intestine. "Voila," she said, unveiling his new visage via the mirror. A snowy mountainscape, steely grays and whites, bare brown trees tendriling across a sleeting skyline. Everything was caught in a moody reddish haze. Through the heavy dots of white snow, the pulsing brown and bruised purple of his guts and blood shone through. "Very somber," he said. "But no eyes. You asked for no eyes." "I sure did." His wife was happier with this landscape. "It's a bit solemn, I guess," she said, lying in bed. He was peering at the twins, a pair of curled, lumpy seahorses in her womb, looking more like shrimp than babies. "It's so hard to picture holding them," she said, her voice turning onto something slippery. She traced her fingers over the glass, concentric circles on either side of the window. "They'll look like the real thing soon." He kissed the glass, which, unlike his, was warm. "Your insides are so much more interesting than mine." "I've told you that's not true." "Of course it is. All you can see inside me is the ham sandwich I ate for lunch." "And the mountains." They both sighed as he fell back onto the bed. The sheet, it was too hot for a quilt or a comforter, the AC was on the fritz, slid across their glassy forms and bunched against their hips and groins. "Your window is just as lovely as mine. It's flat and plain." "I might happen to like flat and plain. I'm like a glassed-in Buddha." I might like a glass din Buddha, so we should both be happy. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva. In the shower, he let the water roll down, sudsy and pungent with his Arctic Blast body wash and dandruff-repelling shampoo. The trees streaked like they were sobbing, the mountains dulling with erosion. When he stepped out, he stared at the blotchy scene, his stomach looming over the curved peaks like a pulsing blood moon. It's like something from the Twilight Zone, she said while they ate dinner. Both had taken to going shirtless, though she still wore her elastic bras, more out of comfort than some heaving shamed feeling that she ought to be covered up. Her tits were swollen and sensitive, she said, and she complained about their out-of-control growth. He poked at her nipples, gentle prods that made her moan, some noise in between crowing pain and pleasure. They ate takeout Chinese soaked in salt and MSG by the day, white boxes stacking on their kitchen island like fortifications against the stove and microwave and refrigerator where the real food was planning a revolt. The smell of pineapple repelled her, and she craved beets, her fingers stained pink. Her window kept stretching, the babies inside growing. Spaghetti squash, eggplant, coconut. You must always be as hungry as me, she said, looking down at them. Then, to him, I'm getting nervous. What will it be like when they want out? They went to a Lamaze class where other women and men showed off their windows. One woman's stomach was covered in a pair of bulging French doors, the handles duct taped together so she didn't burst in the middle of the street. One father's window was a porthole, steely and thick. Another's had shutters that flapped when he walked, bruising his ribs and thwacking his arms. All of the men's windows were plain and clear, and they asked him about his artwork. Just to liven it up, he said, waving his hand in dismissal. They nodded and dispersed as the instructor directed them to take their seats. Your window ledge hurts my neck, the woman stationed on the mat next to them whispered to her husband. Ow, said the wife of Mr. Porthole when she leaned back and clunked her head against the curved lower edge. These are things we work out together, the instructor said, a bubbly thin woman dressed in black lycra. She clapped and started moving from one couple to another, adjusting their positions. I think we're okay, his wife said when the instructor hovered over them, as long as I don't get paint in my hair. All dry on this front, he said, imagining the buzz of his voice coursing through her brain like little volts of electricity. That helped, she said after class, sitting in the car. She repeated the ee-ooh-ooh pattern. Probably won't do much good the day of, but whatever. The doctor put her on bed rest when she kept ballooning out, even though the children looked fine as far as he could tell. The amniocentesis was clear. 2 healthy babes, just putting on the finishing touches. It's just to be safe, the doctor said, patting the center pane of glass with a kind, solicitous rap of his knuckles. She complained of boredom, even when he brought stacks of books and magazines, and even hauled the television in from the living room and gave her complete control, despite the fact that she couldn't focus on any one thing, moving from sallow celebrities hosting talk shows to the international news to SportsCenter to QVC to the inevitable Harry Potter film being stretched out to the last 5 hours. Ugh, she said, tossing the remote onto his chest. Any day now, he said. Can't we just break this thing with a hammer, crack me open like an egg, and take them out now? She craned her neck, face filled with red warmth. They look like little wrinkly people, don't they? They'd be okay. He kissed her eyelids. The morning she went into labor, he spent extra time staring at himself in the mirror. He hadn't gone back to the artist, and he wasn't sure why. The mountain range had faded to a streaky smear that looked like dissolved bird shit, his torso a grimy windshield. He ran his hands over the paint, granular on the smooth glass, and he watched the motion of his organs, the pulsing of his stomach as it churned the coffee and donut he'd eaten for breakfast. The plumpy heave of his kidneys hypnotized him. When she called to him, her voice scratchy and filmed with an anxious energy, he swore he could see his adrenal glands light up like neon signs. The window cracked, she said, pointing at a sliver at the bottom. Also, my water broke. We'll probably want to throw away these sheets and get a new mattress. He drove while she tried to remember the breathing patterns, then screamed, "Fuck it!" and howled out the open window, screaming nonsense until they pulled into the hospital's covered entryway, and a nurse greeted them with a wheelchair, miraculously knowing about their arrival. Are you always waiting with these things? He said to the nurse. She smiled and wheeled his wife away while he filled out paperwork. The girl came first, which he thought was only fair. He expected the glass to shatter, but it held strong. The crack grew, and the view of her interior faded like the lighting in a movie theater, dimming as the previews start. Before his son arrived, everything had gone black inside her. He wondered if the same was happening to him, but he didn't think she'd like him sneaking off to the restroom to check. A perfectly healthy pair, the doctor said, his medical mask puffing in and out with each word. She held them and blinked back tears while he felt a gurgling that moved up and down through his gut, puckering his sphincter, clogging his throat. He felt along his stomach as his own window started shrinking just as hers must be, and for a moment, As his wife looked up, gesturing with the babes gurgling in her arms, wrapped up like candies in their blankets, he wished that the glass would stay, that both of them would keep themselves open and transparent like that forever. "Will you hold them?" she said. "Okay." He felt a curling warmth, then a frosty chill. "Yes," he said. "I will. Of course I will."